Okay, so last lecture we started discussing the following problem, closest pair of points. And in this problem we're given a set of points plane. Compute the closest pair in this set. Okay, so what's the closest pair of points? So how did we define a closest pair of points?
Distinct points of minimum distance.
Right, so it's a pair of distinct points in the set whose distance is minimum among all pairs. Okay, it's possible that there are several pairs, but finding one is enough. Okay, meaning there are several pairs that have the same distance. Okay, but we just need to find one such pair. Okay, is the problem clear to everybody? Okay. So we wanted to apply divide and conquer here, as opposed to a brute force approach that goes over all pairs of points and computes the distance and keep track of the pair with minimum distance. And we discussed the running time of such a brute force, right? We said it takes quadratic time in the number of points L. Okay? We want to try to improve on that. So in particular, our goal is here to get an order of n log n time algorithm. Okay, this is what we would like to get. And we already discussed last lecture how we would start about that. For an order of n log n time algorithm, you have to make sure that you get a balanced partition. Balance means the two parts should be proportional, doesn't have to be perfectly balanced. Okay? And also you want to make sure that the amount of time you spend in the divide and combine phases remains. So if you want to get order of n log n, right, following a similar approach to merge sort, you would divide into a balanced partitioning, and the running time you spend in the divide and the combine should stay?
Log n. Log n.
No. The depth of the recursion was log n, which is ensured by a balanced partitioning. That ensures log n depth. But if you want the n log n, this means that at every level in the recursion, you shouldn't exceed order of n, linear time, right? So this means that in the divide and combine, you shouldn't spend more than linear time. If you spend more than linear, multiply that by log n, you exceed the n log n. Okay? So this is really the goal. And we already intuitively discussed how we would go about that. So intuitively, the idea is to find a line that partitions this set of points S into two roughly equal parts. Okay? And for simplicity, we could look for either a vertical or a horizontal line. So let's choose vertical. Okay, let's not discuss how we find such a line. We're going to go over the details later. Let's focus on the intuition first. Okay, so the idea is to find a vertical line. Let's call it D. So let's maybe choose a different color. So suppose we have a set of points. Let's just draw a few points here. So the idea is to compute a vertical line that partitions this set into roughly two equal parts. Okay? So let's say the line, again, this is not going to be the line that we compute in the algorithm, but for simplicity, let's draw the line here. let's call this vertical line D. Okay? And this line would separate the set, or split the set into two roughly equal subsets, up to maybe 1 point difference. And then, now this is the divide. The conquer is to recurse on each of the two subsets that we created, each of the two subproblems that we created. Okay? So meaning we solve a smaller problem here by computing a closest pair to the left of this line. We solve a subproblem here by computing closest pair to the right of this line. Okay? So let's say these two recursive calls, again assuming we have a correct algorithm, let's say these two recursive calls return the following two pairs. So to the left of this line, so we return this pair. Let's call it PL for left, QL. To the right of the line, let's say we return, or the algorithm return this pair, PR, QR. Okay? And now, we realized last time that it's not enough to return the pair between these two with a smaller distance, because we would have missed pair of points that would come from both sides of this line. Okay? So we need to do more than that. So the idea is to basically start by computing the distance between this pair. We call it delta L. The distance between this pair, we call it delta R. And then if we let delta denote the smaller between these two, so the minimum between the two is going to be one of them. These are two numbers we know because we have the two pairs, so we know delta L, we know delta R, we can compute their minimum. Okay? Now the observation is that any interesting pair that come from either side of the line, okay, has to be confined to a certain geometric area. Okay? It cannot basically be anywhere in the plane. Okay? We can restrict it to the area between two vertical lines, each within distance delta from D. Okay? So if we take distance smaller, again this delta in this case is going to be this here. So if you take distance delta from here, this is delta from here, so let's say this is delta. Then any pair that comes from either side of the line that potentially could beat the delta has to be confined inside these two basically vertical line within distance delta from this line D. Okay? So let's draw two lines basically parallel to this here. So any pair that we give these two recursive calls did not catch, okay, has to come from either side of this line. It has to be confined to within these two vertical green lines. Okay, why it has to be confined here? Because if the point to the right of this line is right on this red line, then the point to the left cannot live beyond this vertical green line. Otherwise, its horizontal distance from that point would exceed delta. By the same token, apply to this side, we also get that the point on the right of this red line has to live within basically this area in here. Okay? So now we could focus our search on finding a pair of points that come from either side of this line whose distance beats this delta. Okay? But then the observation is that it's very possible that we end up with a linear number of points inside these two vertical strips. So this means we haven't really achieved much, because if you want to look for such a pair by brute force, by examining all distances, then we're still going to incur quadratic running time. So then the idea here, again, to still explore the geometry further, to restrict our search for pairs that live in here and that beat this distance delta. Okay? So the question that we want to ask ourselves here, okay, even though we could have, possibly a linear number of points that live inside here, do we have to compute the distance between every point and every other point here, or can we basically still take advantage of what we've done before in the geometry to confine our search, okay, to basically a limited number of pairs, and how? Okay? So here's the idea. Suppose that I have a pair of points here that live inside this region whose distance beats delta. Okay? So suppose that I have a pair of points, let's call them PQ, that live here, that beat this distance delta. And let's assume that P is the lower point between these 2 points PQ. Right? If you have any 2 points, one of them has to be lower than the other or on the same horizontal line as the other. Let's call that P without loss of generality. Okay? So say P happens to be here. Of course, it could be on the other side, but it doesn't matter. The case is symmetric. So let's say I have a pair here that beats delta, and let's call the lower point in this pair P. Okay? So now I want to try to exploit the geometry to say that I don't really need to compute the distance between P and many points. Okay? If P contributes to a pair that beats delta, I could limit my search to really not many points. Let's discover what we mean by not many points here. Okay? So how can we exploit the geometry? Well, here's what we're going to do. Say I'm looking for a pair, PQ, P is the lower point of this pair, that beats delta. Okay? Now the question is, where could Q live? It's going to live on the right side, right? But, I mean, can it be, like, very far from P? Can I confine it now further? I mean, of course, I know it lives within these 2 stripes, but it could be theoretically, right? I mean, it could be very far from P vertically, theoretically speaking. Okay. But could it really be very far from P vertically if that point contributes to a pair that beats delta? No, right? We could immediately also limit its vertical distance from P to delta. So then really this point, knowing that it has to live between these 2 green stripes, and knowing that it has to have distance at most delta vertically from P, it has to live within this rectangle that I'm going to draw next. So I could draw a rectangle. By taking vertical distance delta here, okay, so the vertical dimension of this rectangle is delta, and its horizontal dimension is, what's its horizontal dimension? 2 delta. Okay. So it has to live here for sure, otherwise I'm not interested in it. Otherwise its distance has to exceed delta from P, and I don't care about such points. Okay? So then its the horizontal dimension of this rectangle is 2 delta, and its vertical dimension is delta. Okay? Do we all agree that that point has to live in here if it's of any interest to me? Okay? Yeah.
Isn't there space within that rectangle where it can't be because it's
yeah, but certainly it has to be here.
Okay.
Right? Let's for now, we're happily saying that. Okay, let's see how we could basically say, well, we could say more. Okay, but it has to be here. It cannot live outside of that. Do we all agree? Okay. Now, is it possible that there could be many points in here inside this rectangle? And again, theoretically, maybe all points could live inside here. But is that possible? Well, the answer is no, actually. The number of points that could live within this rectangle is upper bounded by a very small constant. Why is this the case? Okay, well, let's prove it. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take this rectangle and subdivide it further into squares. Okay, how do I divide into squares? So I'm going to divide it as follows. So I pick the middle point here, the middle point here, the middle point here, the middle point here, and I'm going to join these. And I'm going to divide it basically into 8 squares, like this. So let me maybe highlight these squares. Alright, so I'm dividing it into 8 squares. So this is one square. This is the second. Third. They might not all look like the same squares, but you know, for the precise picture, they look more like squares. Okay? So I divided this rectangle into 8 squares. Okay? What's the dimension of each one of these squares? Sorry?
Is it delta by 2?
Delta by 2. Okay, so each one of these squares, right, because I divided this into delta into 4 parts, each one is going to have delta over 2 horizontally, and vertically I divided this into 2 parts, even though it doesn't look like it. Okay, so each square has, of course, the same vertical dimension as horizontal, which is delta over 2. Okay, so each one of these 8 squares has dimension delta over 2. Okay, so let's magnify one of these squares and draw it over here and study it further. So now I have, let's look at one of these squares. So square is of dimension delta over 2. Okay. Now, if you have a square of dimension A, the longest distance between any 2 points that live inside this square is the length of its diagonal, right? Because this corresponds to when the 2 points are diagonally opposite. Okay? So the farthest 2 points can be from each other if they live inside this square is when they're on opposite corners of the square, either here or here, and that corresponds to a distance between them equal to what in terms of A? A square root of 2, again, using Pythagoras theorem. Okay? So then any square of dimension A, the farthest distance between any 2 points that live inside of it is A square root of 2. So this tells me when I apply this to the following square here of dimension A equal to delta over 2, that any 2 points that live inside this square, their distance is at most delta over 2, which is the dimension of this square, multiplied by square root of 2. It's A square root of 2. A here is delta over 2. Okay? Everybody agrees? Okay, so what's square root of 2 roughly? It's 1.41 divided by 2 is 0.7 something, which is smaller than 1. So square root of 2 over 2 is something smaller than 1. Okay? You multiply it by delta, you're multiplying a constant that's smaller than 1 by delta, you get something that's smaller than delta, right? Okay? So any 2 points that live inside any of these squares, their distance from each other is smaller than delta. Everybody sees that? Okay. So any 2 points that live inside the same square, here or 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 here, their distance has to be strictly smaller than delta. Okay? So now the question is, how many points can live inside the same square?
Or you can only have one in each square, right?
Why at most 1? Why there cannot be 2 or more points that live inside the same square?
We have already calculated all the distances.
Yeah, the minimum distance is already.
The observation is, if you look at any of those 8 squares, okay, any of them, okay, the square lives on the same side of this red line, either on the left or on the right. Okay? So any 2 points that live inside the same square, either here, 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 they have to be on the same side of this red line. If the 2 points live here, or live here, or live here, or live here, they're on the left of this line. If they live here, 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 or here, they're on the right of this line. Okay? So then if any of these squares contain 2 or more points, then the square would contain 2 points that are on the same side of the line and whose distance is strictly smaller than delta. But this is impossible. Why? Because my algorithm found the closest pair that live on the same side of this line, and the distance of that is delta. There cannot be a pair that lives on the same side of the line whose distance is smaller than delta. Everybody agrees? Remember my algorithm, I recursed on the left to find the closest pair on the left, I recursed on the right to find the closest pair on the right, and I let delta be the minimum distance between the two. So I know for sure there cannot be a pair of points that live on the same side of the line, either on the left or on the right, whose distance is less than delta. And if any of these squares, contain 2 points, then I would have 2 points living on the same side of the line whose distance is smaller than delta, which is impossible.
What if the point is on the line D?
What if the point is on the line D? Yeah, so basically, the line D also is going to be split into left and right. Okay? So part of this line is going to be on the left and part of it on the right, if there are many points that live on this line. Okay? So which means basically that you would have also 2 points in that case that would be on the same side of the line whose distance is less than delta. Okay? That's the case. Right? Okay, so very good. So this tells me if each one of these squares contains at most 1 point, right, then this whole rectangle can contain how many points?
8 points.
Most 8 points, including point P, okay? So which is a constant, right? So then this tells me that actually it seems that I don't really need to compute the distance between P and many points here on the line. Why? Because any point outside of this rectangle is not of interest to me, and there are only 8 points that could live, or at most 8 points that could live inside this rectangle. So this really limits my search for a closest pair with a fixed point P to at most 7 more points, or 7 more distances. Okay? Is this clear? So then after recursing on the left to find the closest pair, recursing on the right to find the closest pair, now the combined phase is to search for a closest pair that live in here whose distance potentially could be delta, and we could do it in a more efficient way, okay, as follows. Instead of computing all pairs, okay, after noting the following geometric observation that we just discussed, what I could do now is I could consider all the points that live inside this region between these two vertical green lines. Okay? Let's not worry about how to find them again. That's not difficult to do. We'll discuss that later. But suppose I find all these points that live in here, inside these two vertical lines, okay? Distance delta from the red. So then what I could do is the following. I could order these points, so I could sort them from the lowest point to the highest point in this order. Okay. Again, let's not worry for now how you can do that efficiently. Okay, so what I do is I find all these points that live in here. So let me draw another picture. I find all these points. And I'm going to sort them from the lowest to the highest. So this. And I consider them in this order, starting from the lowest, going up to the highest. Okay? The observation is that if I consider them in this order, and if I'm searching for a pair that beats delta, then for any point that I consider, it's sufficient to compute its distance to the next 7 points in this order. Any point that lives beyond the next 7 points is not of interest to me. Why? Because any point, so if I'm at a certain point P, okay, any point that lives beyond the seven points above P, so any point that lives from here and up, okay, is not of interest to me because it cannot live inside this rectangle. Because if this point lives inside this rectangle of dimension delta, then this means all the points below it also would have to live inside this delta, and that rectangle would contain more than 8 points. Is this clear? Mm-hmm. Okay. So then it's sufficient to, when I'm considering a point P, looking for the other potential point Q, again assuming that Q is the one above P, okay, it's sufficient to compute the distance between P and the next 7 points above it in this order. So I compute the distance from P to this point, from the P to this point.
This is after we have the green area sorted, right?
Yes. So after sorting it, I'm going to consider them in the sorted order from the lowest to the highest. And whenever I'm at a point, I'm going to treat that as the lower point in the potential pair, because I'm trying each point as basically the lower. I'm going up. So what I'm saying is it's sufficient to compute the distance between the point that I'm at and the next 7 points in this sorted order. Okay? Because any point beyond that cannot live inside the rectangle. Of course, it's possible that some of these also may not live inside the rectangle, okay? But I could say for sure that no point above these 7 could live inside. Okay? Right? So to be on the safe side, I just compute the distance between P and the next 7 points. Okay? All right? And what do I do after computing it? I keep track of the pair with P of the minimum distance. And then I consider the next point, do the same, compute its distance to the next 7 points above it, and keep track of the minimum pair so far, and then go to the third, compute its distance to the next 7 points above it, keep track of the minimum so far, and keep climbing up until basically I've traversed my whole sorted list. Okay? So again, the last step, which is the combined step after the 2 recursive calls, okay, is to find all the points that live inside these 2 vertical lines. I could do that because I know delta and I know this vertical line, so I could, filter out all the points that are outside of these 2 green lines and focus on the points that live inside of them. Then, after finding these points, I sort them from the lowest to the highest and consider these points in the sorted order. Okay? Whenever I'm at a point, I treat that as the lower end of pair, and that's safe, right, without loss of generality, because I'm trying each one as the lower. So I'm exhaustively considering all possibilities. And whenever I'm at a point, I compute its distance to the next 7 points after it in the sorted list, and keep track of the minimum pair and keep track of the minimum overall as I go through this list. Okay? Any questions about the high-level description of how the algorithm, the divide and conquer algorithm works before we start discussing the details?
Is it like we go only upwards, not sidewards? Is
Sorry?
it like we sort and go only upwards, 7 points, not sidewards?
What do you mean sideways?
Like if we have a point adjacent to P, then we won't consider that.
If there is, I'm sorry, what? A point?
But adjacent to P.
Adjacent, you mean on the same horizontal line?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll still consider it. Okay. So when I'm sorting, if I have 2 points that live on the same horizontal line, meaning they have the same y coordinate, then I break ties arbitrarily, and I don't care, how basically I place them in this order. Okay. Well, once I created the order, I follow that order. Okay. And yeah.
So what if the point overlaps, like P is another identical point over there?
What do you mean identical? I don't have 2 identical points in my set. Because I assume that the input is a set of points. Okay? So I don't have 2 identical, meaning having the same x and y coordinates. They could have the same x or the same y, but not the same x and y. Because again, the input is a set of points, and a set is not allowed to be to contain duplicates. Any other questions? Yes.
So, what if we had a set of points, half on one side, half on the other, and they're each delta from the midline, and they're each delta apart?
So if you have, sorry, say that again. So if you have, so if you computed your vertical line,
Right.
and then half of the points are to the left, half to the right.
Half to the right, and they're each delta from the vertical line, and they're each delta from each other vertically.
Delta, okay.
So you have 2 columns going vertically
So
up.
let's say this is my vertical line.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and this is delta here. This is delta here.
Yeah.
Okay. So what's your example? So the points are where?
So let's say there's a line delta to the left of the vertical and a line delta to the right of the vertical.
Yeah, so these are the delta, right?
So what if you start filling in points along that line?
Which line? The
The
green line?
The left line.
The green line?
I think it might be green.
Yeah.
Yeah, the left.
So if you have, so the points you mean here, they live on the line?
They live
Okay.
on the line.
Yeah.
And they're each delta apart from each other along that line.
Okay. Yeah, so these live on the same side of this line, right?
Right.
So this means my recursive call has already computed the closest pair of these points and everything also that's on the left.
Yeah.
Okay?
So then, if we make a similar
Here?
column on the right side as
Here?
well, yeah,
Okay.
each delta up,
Okay?
wouldn't we end up having to compute every? I mean, so you say, okay, look for the nearest 8 points vertically. So none of those beat delta, but you always keep coming up with more and more points. Wouldn't we have to compute the distance for all the points?
No, because once you're at a point, so let's say I sort them, right, vertically, these points, okay? So let's say this is point P1, this is P2, this is P3, this is P4, and so on, in this order, right? So whenever I'm considering a point here, okay, we proved, right, formally, that there cannot be more than 7 points of interest to me. Okay? So I think your question is the time taken to do this linear? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
No, of course it's linear. Why? Because fix any point, you're computing at most 7 distances, right?
Yeah.
Each distance to compute it takes constant time. So I'm spending constant time per point,
Right.
right? So is that clear? I'm spending constant time per point. So overall, I spend constant times n points, which is O of n. Is that what you're concerned about?
Yeah, well, I mean, it seems like, okay, so then we could say, well, that bottom set of points, there is none closer than delta, but then we have to consider then move up the vertical line of points. But if all the points, say, all n points are all arranged, half to the left of the
Yeah.
midline and half to the right of distance delta, and they're each delta apart.
Yeah. I mean, okay, so do you agree with me that whenever we're at a point, we're only computing 7 distances? Or you disagree with that?
No, for each point.
So you agree that for each point, we're computing 7 distances? So
Yeah.
forget about the geometry now.
That's all that matters.
Okay.
Yeah.
This immediately tells you that we're spending linear time. Because if for each point you spend constant time, then the overall running time is linear. You don't have to worry about any setting. If you agree that with every point, with every fixed point, we're computing 7 distances, then you don't need to look at any example.
Yeah.
Because whenever you're at a point, so what's happening is you have this array, right, or list of points sorted, okay? Whenever you are at a point, you're computing its distance to the next, the one after, seven.
Yeah.
That's it. So constant plus 7 times per point. You jump to the next, you also compute 7 distances. So for every point, you spend constant time.
Yeah.
So overall, it's linear.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question? Or?
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean,
Okay. If that's the confusion, again, it has nothing to do with how you place the points. You have, again, just to look at the running time that we spend, basically, to compute 7 distances per point and overall. Okay? So that's 7 times order of basically 1, which is the running time to compute a single distance. Multiplied by 7, it's still order of 1. Order of 1 multiplied by n is order of n. It's running time. Okay. What are we saving? We're saving computing the distance from P to each point above this line. Here where you could have a linear number of such points. This is where you would get the quadratic. Okay? Whenever you're computing linear distances per point, then you could be spending quadratic time. If you spend constant time per point, you're good. Okay?
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Can you briefly just go over how we know that there's at most 7 or 8 points or 7 other points in that box, in those boxes? I think I understand.
Okay, so do you agree that in each one of these 8 squares, there can be at most 1 point?
I agree. I'm not sure. I missed exactly how we proved that.
Okay, well, suppose, let's do it by contradiction. Suppose one of these squares contains 2 points, right?
Yes.
Okay. Then these 2 points live on the same side of this line, in this case, to the right.
And we've already computed the distance.
Yeah, I mean, we already computed, but most importantly, the distance between these two is strictly smaller than delta. Because the farthest any 2 points can be that live inside the same square is when they're diagonally opposite. And in which, even in such a case, their distance would be delta over 2 square root of 2, which is smaller than delta.
Okay.
And this cannot happen. You cannot have 2 points that live on the same side of the red line whose distance is smaller than delta, because your algorithm found the closest pair, and that distance was delta, actually. So this tells us that this situation is impossible.
Okay.
Meaning you cannot have 2 or more points that live inside the same square, and hence the maximum number of points that can live inside the same square is 1. Okay? So the maximum number of points that you could have here is 8, including point P. Does that answer your
Yes.
question? Any other questions? Still not convinced?
No, I'm convinced. It makes sense. It seems really bad, but you're right. It's linear.
Yeah, it's linear, of course. I mean, these are constants. You know, we ignore constants. There's some product notations. Okay, so let me kind of recap the whole approach before we go into the details. So the divide and conquer approach consists of the following. Okay? You find the vertical line that partitions the set of points into 2 sets of roughly equal size. One to the left of the line, the other to the right. The possibility of some points on the line, we'll explain that later. Okay, let's not worry about the details at this point. Okay. Then what you do is you recurse on the set of points to the left of this line to compute the closest pair. You recurse on the set of points to the right of this line. You're solving the same problem, but now restricting your attention to the points on the left. Solving the same problem, restricting your attention to the points on the right. You compute the closest pair here, closest pair here. Because you have the pair, you have the distance. You have the distance, you have the minimum between the two. Okay? Then, now you're done with the conquer phase. Now in the combine phase, okay, knowing this distance and this vertical line D, you're going to find all the points that are within distance D from this line horizontally. Okay? And again, that's not difficult to find. We'll discuss that in details. You'll find them, and then you sort them from the lowest to the highest. Okay? All right? In non-decreasing order of the y coordinates. Okay? So the y basically either stays the same or increases. You find this list, and then you go over this list in the sorted order, okay, starting from the lowest. For every point, you consider that as the lower in the pair, and you compute its distance to the next 7 points in this list. Okay. So for every point, you compute its distance to the next 7 points, and you keep track of the minimum overall as you scan this list. Okay. So now this gives you closest pair of points that live in here. Now you have 3 pairs. Okay. Here to the left, to the right, and in here you compare them and return the closest among those 3. Okay? Right. Any questions about the overall approach? All right, so now let's go to the details. Okay, and let's also keep the running time in mind as we discuss the details. So remember, we said that if we're aiming for an order of n log n, then we have to ensure 2 things. First, that the depth of our recursion is logarithmic, which means that our partitioning should be somehow not very skewed, proportional. And we're already ensuring that, assuming that we're partitioning them into 2 subsets of roughly the same size. So we shouldn't be worrying about this, again, assuming that we could find such a vertical line and split them as such. The second thing that we have to be careful with is that the 2 phases, the divide and combine, can be carried out in linear time. You cannot spend more than linear time to do this. Okay? All right, so let's see how this can be done. Yes?
This is a dumb question, but for partitioning the space, to make it not skewed, all we care about is the number of points on
Right.
either side, right?
Number of points, yes. Our problem size is n, the number of points to start with, and basically is the number, whenever you divide, it's number of points in each point. Okay? Any other questions? All right, so let's start with finding this vertical line, right? Because this is the first thing that we need to do. Okay? So how can we find a vertical line that splits the set of points into two roughly equal subsets? One to the left or on the line, and the other to the right or on the line. So how can you do that?
Sort them by their x coordinate.
Very good. So sort the points by their x coordinates. Okay. So say now you've sorted them. How do you find this line?
Once you sort them, go advance halfway into the
Right.
n over 2.
Right. So it's the vertical line that goes through the x coordinate of the point in the middle of the sorted array. Okay. Is this clear? So we're gonna, after sorting the points by their x coordinates, we're gonna look at the point that is in the middle of the sorted array, and the vertical line basically is a vertical line that goes through the x coordinate of that point. So here's in the picture what we're doing. We're going to create a sorted array X containing the same set of points, but now the points appear in sorted order of their x coordinates. Okay. So this is point 1, you have the x1 and y1. So now what you're going to do after sorting them, you're going to look at the points that's stored in the middle of the array, roughly, and the integer division by 2. And you're going to look at the x coordinate of this point, right? Let's call it L. And your vertical line B is the vertical line that goes through the x coordinate of this point of L. So the equation of the vertical line is going to be x equal to L. Okay, the x of that point. Okay. The points to the left of this line are going to consist of all the points up to this point. Okay. You could include it on the left or right, doesn't matter. Okay. And the points to the right of this line are going to consist of the points starting at n over 2 plus 1 all the way to L. Okay. So this is going to be set to the left, and this is going to be the set to the right. Now it is possible that many points live on this line, meaning you have many points that have the x coordinate L. But that's fine, because the way you partition them ensure that the two parts remain of roughly the same size. Okay? Is this clear? Because again, you chose to partition at the middle, so it is possible that you have many points that have L as x coordinates. So you could stretch, we could create some stretch here, but you don't care, because the way you partition them ensure that roughly half the points are on the left, roughly half the points on the right. So you partition those points also on the line to ensure that the partitioning is balanced. Okay? Is this clear? Now there's already a problem here. What's the problem? So to sort these, how much time do you spend? And log n. This is the best that we know. This is the best that you can do, right? So you already spend order of n log n. Well, we said that you cannot afford order of n log n, because if you spend order of n log n and you have, a recursion depth log n, then you're not going to get order of n log n running time. You'll get order of n log n times the depth of the recursion, which is log n. So that would be n log square of n. And you cannot spend more than linear time. So what would you do? Is this a problem, really?
What if we just sorted before we would start recursion?
The idea is that this sorting is going to happen only once at the beginning, before we actually do the divide and conquer. Okay? So at the beginning, before we execute this divide and conquer algorithm, we're going to sort the points with respect to their x coordinate and store this list in x. Okay? Just once at the beginning. So that's fine, because spend order of n log n once. Okay? It's perfectly fine. Okay? So this gets added to the running time of the algorithm, and it doesn't affect basically the asymptotic running time. Okay? As long as you're not sorting inside the algorithm, you're good. Okay? Now, would you be able to use x throughout the execution of the algorithm? Because of course you don't want to just use it once at the beginning to split the set. Will you be able to use it throughout the algorithm? Yes. Because now, after the first division, when you recurse, you have also those points on the left sorted by their x-coordinate. So to divide further in the recursive calls, you also look at the middle of this subarray. And also here in the recursive call to the right, when the algorithm when it divides further, is going to look at the middle of whatever array you recurse on. Okay, so you don't need to sort from now on. You just sort once at the beginning. All right, is this clear? All right, so we're good finding this vertical line. After finding this vertical line, we already have the points on the left. They're actually in this array. We could create a new set if you want, called SL, containing them, set containing, or just use these subarrays. That's perfectly fine. But we have those points, so we could recurse on this. We could recurse on this right away. Okay? This recursive call is going to return the closest pair on the left, again assuming the whole thing is correct. This recursive call on this set of points is going to return the closest pair on the right. We have delta L because we have the pair. We have delta R because we have the pair. We have delta because we have delta L and delta R. Okay? So far so good. Now, the combined phase, we need to compute all the points that live inside these two vertical lines. Okay? How do we do that? So is it clear where we are now? We've returned from these two recursive calls. We've computed delta L, delta R, and hence delta. So now the combined phase. We have the vertical line D. Okay, it's the line of equation x equal L, where L is the x-coordinate of the point in the middle. We have that. And we have delta. How do we compute all the points that live inside here?
Our x is sorted, so from L to L plus delta. From L to L plus delta.
From L to?
L plus delta and minus delta.
So the observation is that any point that lives here, or a point lives here, if and only if its x-coordinate is between L minus delta, because this is the equation of this line, x equal L minus delta. Right? The equation of the red line is x equal L, and the equation of this green line is x equal L plus delta. So any point that lives in here, its x-coordinate has to be comprised between L minus delta and L plus delta. So to find this set of points, all I need to do is single out the points in my set whose x-coordinate is between L minus delta and L plus delta. I know L because it's the x-coordinate of the point in the middle, because I know the line. I know delta, right, because this is the minimum between delta L and delta R, and now I have delta L and delta R. So I know these two values. I have them. Okay. So how can I find the points whose x-coordinates satisfy these two inequalities?
Your search on each side of L.
So actually, we could search the whole array. We don't care because we have linear time. But yeah, if you want to start here and go both sides, that's also fine. Asymptotically, it doesn't really make a difference. So we could scan this array, and for every point, we could check if its x-coordinate satisfies these two inequalities, if it's comprised between these two. If it does, I pick it up. Okay? That takes linear time, which is allowed, so I'm fine. Okay? Okay? So now I have all the points that live in here, okay? But I want to sort them with respect to the y-coordinate. Okay? And what do I do?
So when we sorted it the first time,
So let's use the same. Let's apply the same trick. Okay, let's sort again once from the beginning of the algorithm, but now with respect to the y-coordinate. Okay? So I'm doing two sorts, but at the beginning of the before starting the divide and conquer. Okay, I first sort the set of points with respect to the x. I sort them in a list x, and then I do another sort, but now with respect to the y. Okay? And I store my points in a list y. So both lists contain the same set of points, all the points in my set. Okay? But the difference is the order of the points. Okay? Here they're ordered with respect to their x in short order. Here they're ordered with respect to the y in a short order. Okay? And I'm done with sorting. I just do it, twice from the beginning before I apply the divide and conquer. Okay? Now, when I come here to this combined phase, okay, I need to find those points that live in here, but I need them sorted with respect to the y coordinate, from the lowest to the highest. So how can I do that now? In linear time. Because after desorting, you're not allowed to spend more than linear time in these phases.
Well, you sort of scan Y and pick them up as you go, right?
Instead of scanning X, just scan Y and pick these points that satisfy, whose X coordinate satisfies these inequalities. Automatically, they're going to be picked in the sorted order of the Y. Because Y, the list Y, contains the points in sorted order of the Y coordinate. And you pick them in this order. You're just filtering these points, basically, by picking the points that live in here following the order of Y. And hence, you're going to get these points sorted by the Y coordinates in linear time. Okay? Is this clear? Yeah.
So it looks like we are picking up. We are picking up points between that green line, two of the green lines, right? So that's n times, right? The point.
That's
order
order of
of n,
n,
right?
That's order of n time. That's to pick them. Yes.
Right. And then picking those from y as well. That's another n. So you
No. We're just picking them up once from y now, not from x.
Okay.
Right. So the problem is if you pick them up from x, then you're not going to get them sorted.
That's what we have.
No, you cannot sort after picking them up. Because if you sort after picking them, well, you could, yeah, I mean, you could pick them and then consider the y, and but that would, why would I do that? Okay, I mean, so I would use y instead of using x in this case, right? That's simpler. Why would I pick with respect to x and then you traverse y to determine whether I picked these in the first run or not, right? I just immediately use y and go over y, picking out these points. Automatically, I'm going to get them sorted by the y coordinate. Is that clear? So I'm not using x for picking up these points here shortly.
Yeah, basically you're using y for that.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So what I'm doing really is I'm iterating through the points in here,
Yeah.
following the sorted order. And for each point that I pick, I look at its x coordinate here. I ask, is the x coordinate comprised between L minus delta and L plus delta? If it is, I pick it and go to the next point. If it's not, I skip it. Okay? And follow that. So automatically, the list of points that I picked would be sorted with respect to the y coordinate. Okay. Any other question? Yeah.
Like when we have a set of points, so while doing this sort, are we separating the x coordinates and y coordinates? I mean, are we saving them in those different arrays?
We're not separating the x. So these two arrays contain the same set of points. The same set of points. I'm not separating the x from the y. Okay? So every entry in this array consists of a single point. And all the points in my set are going to be in each one of these two arrays. Okay? The only difference between these two is the order of the points. So here, the points are going to appear in basically non-decreasing order of their x. So the x's either stay or increase. Here, the same points, but now they've been shuffled around so that they appear in non-decreasing order of the y. Okay? I'm not extracting the x from the y or doing anything like that. I cannot. The point is a whole. You have to keep it as a whole.
We selected from x, let's say that we selected points that are in between L minus s, and from that array.
Right?
And then we started, wouldn't we have less number of elements to sort?
Well, it could be, but it could be a linearly number, so you cannot afford it.
You could be all.
Yeah. Could be less than n, but what if it's n over 100? Still, asymptotically, it's the same. It can cause, again, n log n over logarithmic depths, which would give you n log square of n. You cannot afford that. Any other questions? Okay, good. So now you pick these points that live in here, sorted with respect to their y coordinate. Let's call this list of points y mid. This part. So again, let's say y mid is the list of points that's been extracted. It's or middle, from y by picking those points whose x-coordinate satisfies that it's between L minus delta and plus delta. Good. So now what you do is you go over y mid, and for every point here, you compute its distance to the next 7 points in this list. Okay? So for every point, you're computing 7 distances. Okay? Here you compute the distance to the next 7, and so on. And as you do that, you keep track of the minimum distance so far. Okay? Until you've scanned all the points. Okay? So that's going to give you the pair of points that live in here, who's basically that is closest. Okay? And then you compare this pair that you get from here to PL, QL, PR, QR, and return the closest among the 3. Okay? Now one thing we have, yes?
Sorry, have we already filtered y such that it only contains the x's that are in the range that we want?
Right. It's in y mid, yes.
Okay, so but somehow we filtered it so that like.
So
they're
we
not
went
all
over
right.
y, right? So we went over y, and while going over y, we picked those points whose x coordinate is between L minus delta and L plus
So
delta.
once we get there, we know that's where it starts, the range of. Okay. no,
Sorry,
yeah,
I think I'm not getting your question. Then.
No, I understand it now. I was just.
So y mid was created from y
Mhm.
by going through y in this one order and picking out the points whose x coordinates satisfy the certain quality, meaning they live here.
Okay.
So if you pick a point, we put it here.
Okay.
Pick a point, put it here, and so on. We created y mid, okay, and now we're iterating through y mid, computing distance between each point in the next cell. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay. So, right, one thing we haven't discussed, as in any recursive algorithm, there is a base case, right? Where do you stop this divide and conquer, okay? And just do the computation right away, okay? So you could carry on this divide and conquer, provided that each one of these 2 subproblems contains at least 2 points, right? Because you're assuming that each recursive call returns a pair. So you need a pair, at least 2 points to live on each side, right? So this means that if I'm calling the algorithm and my set of points contains at most 3, then I cannot split it further, because if I split it further, one of the sides won't have a pair of points. Okay? I cannot do divide and conquer anymore. Okay? I could do divide and conquer provided that I get at least 2 points on each side, meaning that my set of points contains 4 points to begin with. Okay? So if, again, I reach a subproblem whose size at most 3, I can no longer do divide and conquer. That's my base case, meaning if I have 2 points or 3 points, I have to stop. But if I have to stop, I still have to return the closest pair, but that's easy, right? Because if you have 2 points, the closest pair consists of these 2 points. Right? You just return the 2 points. And if you have 3 points, then what do?
We check all 3.
We try all the 3 distances, right? There are 3 distances. If you have 3 points, then you have 3 distances. So you compute this distance, compute this, and return the closest pair among those 3. So that's constant time. So our base case is going to be any subproblem whose size is at most 3. Okay, that's a base case. 2 or 3. So at most 3. Okay, so that's it. Let's now, I'll give you a high-level description of the algorithm. Try to give you a little bit more detail than in the textbook, because your first programming assignment is to implement this algorithm. Okay. So I'll try to give you a little bit more in detail than in the textbook, so you could follow the pseudocode here. But again, we're not going to be able, to give a pseudocode. Here, this is each step here is going to be a lot of work to do. All right, so let's start. So before you call the recursive algorithm, which I'm going to call closest pair algorithm, you first have to sort the set of points in S. So our set of points, I'm going to call it S. And again, you can store these points in an array where every point is a record consisting of its x coordinates and y coordinates. So before you start the divide and conquer algorithm, you have to create two lists. The first one is x, and x is going to consist of S sorted by its x coordinate. And you have to do another sort to S, but now with respect to the y coordinate. And you store this list in y. So those you do at the beginning, before you call the divide and conquer algorithm. Okay. From now on, there is no sorting anymore. Okay. Now, for the sorting, you could use any order of n log n sorting algorithm, because the overall running time of your algorithm should remain n log n. Okay. So you could use heap sort or merge sort. The pseudocode for merge sort is provided in the textbook in chapter 2. You could use that if you want to implement it. Or if you want to implement heap sort, it's easier, you could do that. But everything has to, the whole running time has to be order of n log n. Okay, so now you start the divide and conquer algorithm. So again, first thing to do is to distinguish, the base case. So if the set of points S has cardinality, so cardinality is the number of points is less than or equal to 3, then return the closest pair P-min, Q-min. In this case, I'm going to say by brute force, meaning by trying all the possible distances. So if you have 2, you don't need brute force, you just return the pair. Otherwise, you can put the 3 distances and return the closest pair. If you're here, this means that your set of points contains at least 4 points, and now you could go ahead with the divide and conquer. Okay? So the first thing to apply the divide and conquer is to find this vertical line D and split the set of points. Okay? To find the vertical line, you're going to use the array X. Okay? So using X, and you know what does that mean, basically, you look at the middle. Compute or determine the vertical line D that partitions let's say the vertical line D of equation, maybe to be more specific. So L is again going to be the x coordinate of that point in the middle. Now, again, for the sake of clarity of the pseudocode, I'm denoting those sets with SL and SR because you're recursing, so you start on S, now you have to recurse on these. But for implementation, you don't really need to create those sets. Those sets are going to be the subarray of X from the beginning to the point in the middle. The SR is going to be the subarray of X after the middle up to the end. Okay, so you don't really need to, but just for clarity of the recursive algorithm using these set notations. Again, you find the middle, throw everything in the middle to the beginning in one set, everything else on the second set. Okay? Now that you've computed SL and SR, you have two sub-problems. You recurse on each one of them, so recursively compute, recursively I mean all the same algorithm here, compute a closest pair PLQL in SL and the closest pair PR QR in SL. Okay? So now you have the pair PLQL, you compute delta L, which is the Euclidean distance between PLQL, the norm of PLQL. You compute delta R, which is the Euclidean distance R. And knowing delta L and delta R, you can compute the minimum of the two. Right? So far so good. So now the combined phase. So now we need to find all the points that live in the middle, and we need them to be in sorted order. Okay? So to do that, we're going to use the array Y. Okay? Step 5, using Y, compute the set of points Y mid consisting all the points in S whose X coordinate satisfies X between L minus delta and L plus delta. Okay, again, I know L and I know delta, so I know these two numbers, so I could compute find out all the points with x coordinates here, and since I'm following the array y, I get them sorted in non-decreasing order. Of their y coordinates. Okay. This is step 5. Now, knowing the set y mid, I could iterate through it. So iterate through y mid for each point. Y mid. Compute its distance to the next 7 points in y mid. And keep track of the pair called p mid, q mid. Minimum distance. Throughout this iteration overall. Okay. Now you have the 3 pairs, P mid, Q mid, PL, QL, PR, QR, so you return the closest pair among these 3. This is a high-level description of a solution to the problem. Again, I tried to go over more details than in the textbook. So yeah, any questions before we look at the running time? Yeah.
So we stop recursing after the third step, right?
We stop recursing. Yeah, so here you have 2 recursive calls.
And then we start recursing.
Well, you're going to return from, when you return from these 2 recursive calls, of course, but these 2 recursive calls entail also other recursive calls, right?
And
So when
after all of that, we are going to the fourth step, right?
after
After recursing until we have only 3 points.
So after returning from these 2 recursive calls, you have the 2 pairs. Okay, so when you return, when you backtrack from these 2 recursive calls, you have the 2 pairs, and we're going to proceed to here.
So my question is, instead of sorting y initially before the algorithm,
Right?
we pick after the recursing, after the third step,
Yeah?
we pick the delta, right? In the first step.
What do you mean in the first step? You mean in
Fourth
this step?
fourth one.
In the 4th step?
We got delta, right?
Right, we get delta
In
here.
fifth
Yes.
step using y, you pick that x coordinates that have L minus delta and L plus delta.
So what do you mean instead of picking y? So after delta we find those points, because we need delta to find them, right?
Yeah, what I'm asking is after fourth step, we use x to pick those points.
We use X to pick these. Yes.
And
Use
then,
the X coordinate.
And then if you sort in the 6-step, if you sort that array that has those points.
You mean Y mint?
By mid, yeah.
We're not sorting Y mint. We're finding the points that satisfy this and putting them in Y mint.
Yeah.
Right.
Instead of calculating Y initially, that Y.
Right.
What if we do it this way? I mean, we pick these points from X array and then sort using Y coordinate.
But this is exactly what you asked before, and I told you.
Yeah.
The problem here is that if you sort here, you could spend n log n time
But we
inside.
only have to sort it once, right?
Why you have to sort it once?
After getting the Y points, we keep.
Yeah,
it
but
repeating.
you know this. You're sorting it once per recursive call here. But then you know when you recurse on the left and recurse on the right, you'll be doing another basically sorting to those points inside there. So I mean the picture really this goes on, right, until you get to the base case. So this is the first vertical line, right? Okay. Now after returning from the recursive call from the left, recursive call from the right, you're going to be sorting those points, right? But now look at the recursive call here on the left. The recursive call on the left is going to create another division, and then it's going to find those points that live in here, right? And also it's going to sort them. So you don't want to do that. That's the problem. It's not a single sorting. This is recursive, right? Any other questions about the pseudocode before we go to the analysis? Yeah, what?
Why
I could 5 teams, the winner.
Why we can maximum number of points in Y made is 7 with 8 or 10 more than that.
The max Y met could contain many points. Right, but we only compute the distance from each point to the next 7.
To the next 7.
Right, because the points that live beyond the next 7 cannot live inside this rectangle. So there's no need to compute the distance from P to them. They're not going to give me anything better than delta. Because I know for sure these cannot live inside this rectangle of interest. Does that answer your question? Okay. You had a question? Yeah.
Oh, just want to clear number 5, like using Y, comma, right? I see it's like...
Yeah, Y, yes. This is the array Y, yes. Using the array Y, comma, yes. Any other question?
So in the end, we end up with 3 minimum distances, and we just pick the one, right? Is that
At the end
that's
of
what we're
this,
saying?
but again, this is just, one call, but this is happening, throughout.
I see what, okay.
Right. So of course this happens at the top level,
Yeah.
but of course it's happening also on the left, on the right, and so on. Yeah. To find the closest pair here, you're doing the whole thing again, but just to the left of the line, and the same thing is happening to the right. That goes on.
For step 6, that 7 point, calculate 1 to the 7 closest P. That's one recursive call.
Here?
Yeah.
No, that's not recursive. No, we're iterating through Y mid. We're iterating through Y mid. For every point, you compute the distance to the next 7. So if you're at point of index I, you're computing the distance from point pi to point pi plus 1, from pi plus 2, pi plus 3, and so on, until basically, the point 7 points. Okay. There's no recursion in here in step 6.
After the 7 point, the next.
Then you go to the next point, pi plus 1, and compute its distance to the next 7 points. And as you do that, you're keeping track of the closest pair. Just like you scan an array and find the minimum, right? So whenever you make a comparison, you also update it to the current, or the smallest. You're doing the same thing here. For 7 points, not for...
So should the starting point of iterating be like when you, I guess, you need at least 7 points?
Right, so you could stop, of course, 7 points from the end, of course. Looking at the 7, of course, but I mean, you still have pairs, right?
Right.
To consider, yeah.
Just to, if I'm just trying to think of all of these recursive calls happening, really, if we're looking at it from a high level, we're never comparing any more than 7 points or three points because we're going down to the base case, right? Does that make sense?
Okay, well, I'm sorry. So do you mean the
Or
7 points here,
yes,
or the recursion?
Since we're going down to the base case,
Right.
we're we're only ever at the most computing 1 point to the closest 7, or just to the 3 in the base case on one side. Right?
No, these are two different things. So let's say this is your vertical line, right? Okay. Now, so whatever, I mean, there could be like 3 points, right, that live in here, okay? So at this point here, you're no longer computing a vertical line that split them, okay? You're just computing these 3 distances, okay, and returning basically closest pair from here, okay? The same thing happens here. I mean, here it could contain more than that, so you might need to, I don't know, split further to compute a closest pair in here, okay? So here, these are the base cases. I mean, when we get to a sub-problem of size at most 3, there's no recursion anymore, okay? Now, when you return from these 2 recursive calls, you're going to find all the points that live between these 2 vertical lines. It's possible that those also will still be here, okay? Now, here, when you look at the points, okay, there's no recursion anymore. Okay, this is from the backtracking. Okay, this is from the combined phase. Here you're going to find all those sorted and then compare each one to the next 7 points. This is so there are 2 different things. So here basically it's in the base case of the recursion. Here it's in the combined phase. So this is after you return from these 2 recursive calls when you do the 7. Is that what you're asking about, or?
I think so. Just trying to understand it. I'll maybe text you a little bit later.
Sure, yeah, I mean, so again, this is a recursive, right? So you're going to keep dividing. So if you think about it, you're dividing those, and now recursing means you're creating another vertical line, recursing creating another, and then recursing. They're also creating vertical line in here. So it's really just creating these lines and going down onto the base case and then backtracking. Okay, backtracking, you're doing this y mid, and returning a pair, and then so on. So this is just in the combined phase of after every pair of recursive calls.
But if that y mid has less than 7 points, does it throw an error?
Does it? I'm sorry.
If y mid has less than 7 points,
yeah,
it throws an error, right? While combining.
It throws another.
Error. Step 6. If there are less than 7 points,
yeah,
while combining.
Yeah. So what do you do? I didn't get that part. What do you do then?
It throws an error.
It throws another error. Oh, I mean, of course, when we say here, of course, if you have fewer, you're not going to compare, to the 7. You just compare to, at most 7. Okay? So if you reach really the end, again, I mean, this is a high-level pseudocode. For these little things, you have to deal with them when you implement them. So if you're, if you reach a point and there are fewer than 7, you still have to compute this distance to, the remaining points, whatever that number is. Okay? And same thing here. When you get to the point before the last, you're just computing one distance. Of course, you're not going 7. Okay? So you always go from that point to at most 7. Okay? So you always have to keep track of the max of the array.
Is it possible that 3 points have the same distance?
Yeah, why not?
So in this case,
The
we return
equilateral
3
triangle.
points.
It's allowed. Yeah, there could be many closest pairs. You just have to return one. Okay, any other questions? Okay. So let's try to kind of finish this before the break. So we're still really left with the analysis. And again, here really the analysis just reduces to showing that in the divide and conquer, you're doing linear time in the divide and in the combine, because that will give you a recurrence relation that's pretty much like the recurrence relation for Mercier. Okay? So here, to create x, you spend order of n log n. We know that using Mercier or equal to order of n log n. To create y, you spend order of n log n. Okay? But you do this just once, you do this once, so that's twice, so you get order of n log n plus order of n log n, and afterwards you're just doing the divide and conquer. So if you could show that this runs in order of n log n time, then adding 2 order of n log n is not going to change the asymptotic value. Okay? So now let's look at what recurrence relation you get out of this divide and conquer algorithm and show that has a solution order of n log n by just showing it similar to that of merge sort. Okay? So to analyze again the running time of a recursive algorithm, you say suppose that the running time is t of n, and let me try to come up with a recurrence relation describing this running time. Okay? So here, this is the base case of this recursive recurrence relation or recursive algorithm. So if you're left with at most 3 points, okay, then the running time here is constant because you have at most 3 pairs. So for problem size 2 or 3, the running time is a constant. Okay? So it doesn't basically add much. So this is order of 1. Now, using x, you compute a vertical line. We know how to do that. It actually takes constant time by looking at the middle, okay, of the array. Now, if you want to really partition S into 2 parts and create these 2 separate lists, you'll have to throw the points to the left of the middle into one list, throw the points to the right into another list. That would still take linear time, which is okay. But you don't really have to create SL and SR because you could just use the subarray from 1 to middle, the subarray from middle plus 1 to n. Okay? But let's say you want to create them that's order of n, it doesn't matter anyway. Recursively compute a closest pair in SL, recursively compute a closest pair in SR. So now you're making 2 recursive calls, each to the same algorithm. The only change is that the problem size. Instead of calling it on n points, you're calling it on n, roughly n over 2 on the left, roughly n over 2 on the right. Okay? So this is precisely when you call it on SL, it's t of n over 2. When you call it on SR, it's t of n over 2. So this gives you 2 t of n over 2 overall. Right? Just like in merge sort, you recurse on the left, recurse on the right. This takes constant time because you're computing 2 distances and then finding the min. Now this step 5 entails scanning y, and for every point checking if it's export, then it satisfies this. So that's constant per point. Overall, it's order of n. Okay. Once we have y mid, again, we're iterating through it. For every point, we're computing at most 7 distances, keeping track of the minimum, so that's constant per point. Overall, it's linear. Even though Andy's still probably not very impressed, because so that's linear. And finally, this takes constant time comparing 3 distances and returning the minimum. So when you write down the recurrence relation of this algorithm, this is what you really get. Again, this is not accounting for the sorting, but again, we said we don't have to really worry about the sorting because there are two calls, each taking order of n log n, so that's fine. So the recurrence relation, just for the running time of the algorithm, is the following. So if we're not in the base case, meaning that n is greater or equal to 4, the running time is 2t of n over 2 for these 2 recursive calls. Each of the remaining steps has its running time bounded by order of n, and there are constantly many such steps. So the remaining work is order of n, some constant times n. And if you're in the base case, then the running time is order of n. So order of n is some constant times n, right? So if you want to solve this recurrence, you would replace order of n with c times n, and you replace this with another constant. And the solution is exactly the same as the solution in merge sort. Okay? You only need to carry this constant with you in the recurrence. And that affects the running time by a multiplicative constant. Okay? But everything remains the same. Okay? Everything really gets multiplied by this constant. And since the running time is order of n log n, multiplied by constant remains order of n. Okay, so the running time T of n of the algorithm is order of n log n. Now you add to it order of n log n for the sorting, that remains order of n log n. You add to it another order of n log n for the other sorting, that remains order of n log n. So the overall running time is order of n log n. Okay? Any questions before we stop for a break?
So usually the log n defines the depth in the depth of the recursion, or
No, of course not. The depth could be much larger than log n. But what we're saying is, if you have a problem of size m, and in every basically recursive step, you're dividing it into two parts of roughly equal size, or two proportional parts, then, in this case, the depth of your recursion is logarithmic.
if we divide by equal size?
Not necessarily equal, proportional. So it could be n over 3, 2n over 3, n over 100, 99 n over 100. That will still give you logarithmic depth. This is in this particular case, if you divide into two problems of roughly equal size or proportional size, you get logarithmic depth. Any other questions? All right, so let's stop for a break, and then we start a new chapter on dynamic programming. What are you doing here? Oh, this I is different. Oh, no, it's equal. And it's equal. And it's between the x. So it's the next level is I plus index. So the index goes up, and I compare it where you x are, it's I plus 1. Just indexing the bracket. High level I think about. So x, well, the I is I plus 1. Compare I and I plus 1. I'm just going up. Okay? This will be from here. This one this might not work.
Okay.
This might not work. Is this possible?
Okay.
So let's say you have 2 points here, right?
Yep.
They have the same x.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's say this is y1.
Yep.
And then, so here they're not equal. But then
I'm not even there yet.
you have 2 points here that have basically x.
I just haven't really done
Y2 happens here.
No,
Right?
I got the first two questions.
So you're not going to be comparing.
So we have to like just
Yeah, you have to treat
have
it
to merge.
to do more better work.
And then ultimately just
Right.
Yeah, and then the match. That's good.
Okay.
I'm not totally out there.
Okay. Yeah, I remember reading it. I don't know if I can believe that.
Yeah, it's like some music.
Yeah, I understand. I think that's also important.
I was going, this moment this weekend was just, I feel like I was in it. It was really going really slow, yeah. Yeah, okay. Good luck with all. Thanks.
No, I started in Jan, then by the time I got applied, and then February in January. To India to get it stamp, whenever I go, I have to get it stamped.